You just saw a video of a spiritual leader named Sri Kumaré. And this is a symbol, looks really similar to a religious symbol pronounced Om, but this is actually not Om. This is pronounced Uae. You guys can try it out saying that, you know. If you close your eyes, you just go, Uae. It feels really good to say that. And so it looks like an Om, but it's it's another sacred symbol, and it's the sound of transformation, and it's something that I just made up one day, and I took the Om, and then I just sort of took part of it and put a line there, and then made a little dash, and then it looked really cool. I made a necklace out of it too, and kind of looked like a superhero symbol. So let me just explain from the beginning where Uai came from. I grew up in the U.S. I grew up in New Jersey, and I've lived in New York most of my life. And I had very religious parents, Hindu parents, and not religious dogmatically, but this was something that was always in topics of conversation about Hinduism. And when I was growing up, Hinduism, like for a lot of people, religion is this tragic incident that happened in their childhood that they fight against, and they move to New York and get away from it. But I think for me, when I was growing up, Hinduism has this interesting variety of experiences you can have in it, and it's really interesting because there's so many stories involved in it. And as a kid, I was actually not so turned off by religion. It kind of opened up this world of mythology for me. And what people see as Hindu gods had stories attached to them, and I would be really into them. They were the superheroes that I grew up with, were, Shiva, Ganesh, Vishnu, all of these things. I knew, how they were born, where they came from, the wars they were in. I read the Indian epics, and that was just part of growing up, and it's just like Spider-Man, Batman. That's the kind of thing that it was to me. And I also, became very interested in why we believe in religion, why it even exists. So, as I got older, I decided to study religion in college. It became my minor. And I think one of the reasons it wasn't my major was because at some point when I was in college, I was studying these religious texts, and I said, this isn't actually a different subject than literature. These are all stories. Everything here is a story that gives us some sort of structure and a way to believe. And obviously there's so many reasons we can criticize religion, but I was really fascinated by why do we grab onto these different stories. So as I got older, living in New York, I noticed that what was, this sort of very strange counterculture thing, which was Eastern spirituality, which when I was a child, the most vivid image that anyone had about India and Indian spirituality was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, where this guy reaches into somebody's chest and grabs their heart, and then there's all of these people who are worshiping him, and the heart goes on fire. And I remember that, anytime I got picked on as a kid, I would do that. I would pretend to be able to grab someone's heart, and nobody messed with me. But there was this sort of exotification, this sort of otherworldliness to what was happening in India. That's not the experience I had in India. It was totally different. So, cut to I'm in my 20s, and I decide, I'm looking around, and I see everyone's getting into New Age and yoga, and people are dropping Oms and Uaes, if they existed, and other symbols, and there's a whole industry being born out of this sort of marketing of Eastern spirituality, and I didn't really buy it. I didn't think this was an earnest thing. It just seemed like, cool, we can now sell someone else's culture. And so I had a lot of questions. So I, had been working in film. I was shooting documentaries, and I decided, I'm going to make this movie about, the yoga culture in America. And it started really small. I was just interviewing, I guess, yoga teachers, girls who practiced yoga and meditated and had new Sanskrit names. And they would introduce me to their teacher and like, yo, you got to meet my teacher. He's so amazing. And then I'd meet some sort of dreaded, dirty hippie guy who was clearly hitting on them. And but then they would introduce me to someone who was like, a 110-year-old man in Columbus Circle who still stands on his head. And it started expanding where I'd meet all these interesting characters. And the only thing that I found in common with all of these people, because everyone seemed to have the answer, was that everyone said they had the answer, and that people believed that they had the answer. So that's what the only characteristic that I saw was in common, because everyone was debating, well, what's real, what's authentic, and I would hear people saying things, prayers that I grew up saying, and it was just totally mispronounced. It's like hearing people from other countries like sing the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and it's really just they just follow the sound of it, and it doesn't really matter what it is. So I was just fascinated by this, and I thought, hey, what if this movie I'm making, it's not really nailing it. I'm trying to say all these people are sort of fake gurus, they're not real. But, you can't really judge, what's real in someone's spiritual experience. You just can't. You don't know what's going on in someone's mind. So I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't be shooting the movie that I'm shooting. Maybe I should try something else out. So I thought, let me make an experiment. What if I decided to be a spiritual leader? Could I do it? Wouldn't that prove that anybody could do it? Wouldn't it prove that it didn't really matter if something was authentic? So at this point, I have a production company. I'm doing commercials, some documentary work, and I go to my my producing partner, Brendan, and Brian, and I say, hey, I want to make this movie, and it's based on this character named Kumaré. So I'll just take you through who Kumaré is. So this is Kumaré with older guru-looking gentleman. And this is Kumaré in India. This is a trident that he carries around. And here is Kumaré about to go into the royal bath where you get naked with a bunch of other men who look like Kumaré, thousands of them, and cover yourself in ash, and then sort of in a frat boy manner, run crazy through the streets, and then dunk yourself into a holy river. And this is me with just telling some jokes with a buddy. And this is actually the home of Kumaré, which is also the old place where the Beatles went in India with their guru. So here we have the Kumaré website. And so, you get to see a little bit of Kumaré, and then the symbol in the corner, right? Because this is what a religious leader would have. Next, here's an about page. And so everything here, Sri Kumaré is a revered yoga master. He teaches something called the mirror, and he's a charismatic teacher. There's a description of his early life. Everything here is actually completely true about me as well, except that there's no mention of Jersey in here. On the bottom you see Kumaré with a well-known guru named Sri Ravi Shankar, who is maybe the largest NGO in the world. I just walked over next to him for a second. I just kind of took in India doing a pose that looks pretty intense, and then that's a temple, and there's another picture. Yeah. So pretty legit, right? Kumaré basically, I created this character, and I said, let's see what happens when this character goes into the real world. So what we did was, the video you saw in the beginning was made by a disciple named Sarah Markel, and we made a YouTube video, and because she was so devoted to her teacher, she wanted to make this YouTube video. And we actually got, you see 8,000 views. That happened in a week before we started shooting this film that I'm going to tell you about, because you can actually get tags. You can pay for cheap tags in India. And so I got Indian people to click through to find this. And in a week, we were able to make a legitimate guru because clearly there are 8,000 people who've watched this. So, I needed to create not just a character. I mean, this is how Kumaré is a person, but he has to have a backstory. So I thought, I spoke about UAE before, and these are symbols of other religions, and they're very iconic. So that's the Om that looks like the real UAE. And then, the same thing is true. We have all these, brands too. Like, it's really similar. And the one thing about religion is, if you've studied it at all, is that there's this idea of a totem or an icon that people like to gravitate around. And just the same way brands work. So we had to create these symbols as well. And this, the word totem comes from the idea, it comes from the word brother, sister, kinship. And it refers to feeling like you're part of something. And I think that's one of the defining qualities of a religion, and also, with brands as well. You associate yourself with certain ideas. So we create our own symbols, the UAE. That is just the that is a trident. And that is a symbol called the happiness symbol, which is sort of was created on the spot, but also it's something that can be applied to the forehead. So the whole idea is that the whole idea of Kumaré is that Kumaré is an avatar. And so that word is actually from Sanskrit, and it means when a god descends down to earth and takes human form. And we know that through James Cameron, but also we also know that in video games that we take on avatars, and also we take that on on Facebook. We have an identity, and people have an online identity that's not exactly who they are, but in some ways it's what we aspire to be. You see somebody who's always posting like, these are the great videos that I watch, and check out the party I was at, and I want to make sure everyone knows that I attended this event. There's some creation of an identity that's not exactly them, and they might have all that, but deeply inside maybe they're like deeply depressed. But you see these pictures of them looking like crazy at a party and like beer and their friends, and maybe that's the person they want to be, but it's not always true. And I think that's like this dissonance between, who we are and who we want to be. And so what I was thinking was, who is Kumaré? Kumaré is this avatar that I've created. And isn't that really what religion's all about? Is about, making ourselves a better person, the better version of ourselves. So we see all these deities and think, there's something in that person that I aspire to be. So I thought about this, and you see at the bottom, my transformation into my avatar. So one thing that I also realized when making a film about spirituality is there's certain things about spiritual experience that you can't capture. So this is the reason that I wanted to go through the experiment of creating a spiritual placebo. And I just listed here, this is what William James wrote about spiritual experiences. And the top two, ineffability means that you can't explain it. So you can't really make a movie about, what's going on inside somebody's heart and soul, right? Noetic means that you gain some knowledge out of it. And transient, it's passing. And also that the subjects are passive. So something's hitting somebody. So, every religious leader that you always hear about, saw a vision or had some realization or got to the top of a mountain. And so I realized that, I wouldn't know what was going on in people's heads, but I could make a film that could see, could my fake religion create the same mystical experiences as a real religion? So we created this whole world, right? And I said, Uae, you have down here Alikash. That word that's the land where Kumaré comes from. It's this region that's sort of near Nepal and India and, I would say Burma and China. But it was this sort of mystical place you couldn't find on a map. And you see the mirror is actually I'll get to that in a second. So loka means everything is like Sanskrit, but it's a little off. So, the word loka does mean world or place in Sanskrit. And I decided, well, what's a cool word for heavenly place? So I call it Pinkaloka. And that seemed to feel realistic. And I also created something called, how to talk about the universe. So part of that was saying, okay, there are all these forces. So I looked up in Sanskrit, there's the word Vega. That means velocity. And so I created inner force, Antavega, Bahir force, outside forces. And then I just kind of created this whole mythology and philosophy around it. Created a Kumaré Sutra. So this is the sutra here. The top one is Karam Yeva Dikaraste. So that's actually really Sanskrit. Sarvo Bhav. And so those are the top two. So the first one, Karam Yeva Dikaraste, that means just do it. And I thought that is like such an inspiring thing. Just go and. The next one, Sarvo Bhav, is be all you can be. And then some of the other phrases. Unleash the power of the sun. I think that's sunny delight. And eat fresh. And so we just went through all of the corporate slogans. And that's the Kumaré Sutra. But what I realized is that everything that's, these sort of corporate slogans are really, creating this feeling that like whatever you're looking for, whatever you desire, is the experience that you will find in a product. But in fact, if it was a religion, you'd find it in yourself. So it made sense that these words could also work. I'll just briefly jump ahead. So we went to Arizona, myself and a film crew, and we made a film about this social experiment called Kumaré. And when we went out there, we put it out there, we said, hey, look at this website. This guru's coming to town. Would you like to meet this guru? Of course, now we have this whole apparatus. We have music that's created that you heard in the beginning, the chant. We had exercises that we would teach. I had a yoga teacher who was my assistant. And these exercises looked like yoga. Some of them were slightly different. The favorite one that everyone really enjoyed is something called Arjuna Kriya, and it looks like this, warrior stance. And then you just go like that. And it's rough on the knees, but it just feels so nice, So what I discovered very early on, is that people are interested in finding a spiritual leader, and they will come and believe in a spiritual leader because they're looking for a spiritual leader. Everybody asks me, oh, how did they I can't believe people really believed you, that you were this guy, And granted, when people met Kumaré, he walked around with a trident, he was barefoot, I carried a picnic basket, and I spoke in a voice of my grandmother, because that was that was not only the sweetest person and the spiritual leader that I grew up having in my own home, but it just was a way of, channeling this guru. So I would meet people and I'd say, when I started off, I'd say, hello, my name is Kumaré. I am a guru, but I am not real. I come from a place called Alikash. That is a place in my mind. And so people didn't know what I was saying. They thought this man is just so philosophical that what he's telling me must be, must be this fantastic philosophy on the world. But in fact, what I was saying was that I'm actually not real. I'm not really a guru. So what is the whole point of this? I had this theory that there, this seems like a deception, but my idea was that the deception of religion has been happening for thousands of years. And the idea that if I became a guru and I could motivate people and inspire people, wouldn't that mean that anybody was able to do that? And so I wanted to try that out. So one of the things that had to happen, though, was I would have to tell everybody at some point who I really was. We created this philosophy, and I created a course. And the final step in this course is the unveiling. So that was what was going to happen. So really, just to explain the whole process of making this religion, you saw the apparatus. But once we got people hooked into the idea of Kumaré and people wanted to learn from him, that's when the challenge came. It was very easy to have people think that I was from another country. I'm just an Indian person pretending to be an Indian person. So it's really not that difficult. But once you have people, what do you do with them? And what was the point of this experiment? So I created this course. And right here, it's shown, we call them the 5 mirrors. And the idea of the mirror, just to go back to it, is that Kumaré is a reflection of what's inside people. So this idea that there's a guru or somebody who has knowledge to give you outside is just a reflection of what's already inside of you. So I decided, here's the rule. I'm not going to teach anybody anything. That's the religion. I won't teach anybody anything. So I'll create an apparatus around it. So I said, this reflection, make an illusion, project, enact, unveil. Sounds very mystical. But here's really what it was. I am a guru. I want you to make a goal. I want you to find who this avatar is that you want to be. I want you to make a plan on how to be that person. And then I want you to act like it. And then I'm going to just tell you I'm not really a guru. But the point being that this is so similar to every philosophy that we hear in self-help, project a world, the law of attraction, all of this. But here it feels very mystical, and here it's like, well, duh, that's how it works. So once I realized that what I was teaching was actually so simplistic and people were really into it, I started to think, why do we have this great apparatus? Why are there so many self-help books out there? What is it that makes us so unmotivated that we need to actually create an industry to motivate ourselves? And one of the things that I realized is that, being Kumaré, being this character, was for people about faith. And the reason that people were interested in Kumaré was this strange feeling that this person came from another place. You don't even know who he is, but he came here to help people. And I think that was what gave people faith in somebody like Kumaré. The idea is that, faith is, what I realized there was faith was really just sort of people remembering that life isn't really that shitty. Like, it can be really great. And sometimes you just need somebody from another place to remind you that, life can be really good. And so when people saw Kumaré, climbing on top of a bull and running around and singing, Alikash, Pinkaloka, they don't even know what that means, but it felt so good. And the reason that people connected to Kumaré more than people actually would connect to me when I would listen to them was that I really didn't say anything. And the concept of a guru here was just somebody who just listened. So when somebody asked me, what should I do? I said, well, what do you want to do? And then, it made people think. It made people think about what their dreams were, what their goals were, how they could achieve that. And it was really interesting because within this sort of nothingness and cloud of a spiritual sounding nonsense, there was really a heart to it. So even though UAE is not real, even though that Kumaré isn't real, the same purpose that we found in a real religion was in a fake religion. And so I think the most interesting thing also that I saw is that when we start thinking about what's real, when it comes to things that motivate us, we really have to start realizing that it just doesn't matter. because Kumaré wasn't real, and the religion that he taught was made up. But the religion says you have all the answers inside of yourself, and you can make your life happier. Now, the religions that I've studied before, they have deities, they have mystical stories, they have people ascending, descending. I realized that this fake religion somehow made so much more sense than any of the real religions that are out there. And that in some ways we're all grasping to these stories that are already catered to us. I mean, one of the things that was really interesting to realize is, like, why is Buddhism making such a huge impact in America? I mean, if you look at it from one way, it works out with quantum physics, it's very logical. And another way to look at that story is, hey, the story of the Buddha is a rich, wealthy man who has never worked a day in his life, has gone out, started sleeping with a bunch of homeless people, came up with a philosophy that the world is suffering, and of course he's never really suffered himself, so he had to go look for it, and then now has brought this teaching to the world. It makes a lot of sense that, in the first world we would be like, oh, cool, like I didn't realize that people were suffering, and I discovered that. It's sort of catered to us. Meanwhile, you have another section of the world that would love the story of Jesus because he's a poor man who actually has God inside of him. So for Kumaré, the idea is that I'm Vikram, I'm just a regular guy, but I made this film where for just a brief period of time, I was able to be a little bit like one of these religious figures to a group of people and inspire them to make some changes in their life. And it's not because of anybody who I am. It's not about who I am, but it's about how I interacted with people. And so the idea is that, anybody can really do that. And that's sort of the premise of Kumaré, that anybody can find this guru within them. And I think we could just show a little clip of the movie to end this. Thank you.
I definitely believe that at any given time on the earth, there are at least one, if not a couple of, prophets.
I sensed a presence, like a really gentle, wonderful, whispering presence.
I have this image in my head of what this perfect, simple man is like, because that's the kind of person that I want to be.
I don't even think we really had to tell him what was wrong or what we needed to change. I think he already knew.
I can say that my life has changed, and when I'll look back on that point in time, I'll know that it was because of my relationship with Kumaré.
Ooh, I